I think that's for right now. So we're just going to let people still come in. And as you know, this is the last of our 8 sessions in our course on transformative technologies. And I'm here with Ben Lamb and also Ben Sosne, who along with Bob Braddock, James Rosenstein, and Art Sherman have been the team of people that has put this course together. So Ben representing one Berkshire, Ben Lamb representing one Berkshire, and Ben Sosne representing the Berkshire Innovation Center. For those of you who are thinking about the future, which I hope you are, we're going to continue this collaboration with some one-off lectures beginning in February. And so please watch the OLLI website, the One Berkshire and the BIC websites for announcements of those lectures. Also, please watch in your email. Today you will get a course survey. And as you're doing the survey, you'll notice that we're soliciting some additional information from you about what you would like to see as follow-up for this course, since this is a new sort of curriculum area for OLLI. So please feel free to put additional suggestions and ideas into the appropriate questions in the questionnaire that will be coming to you today from the OLLI office. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ben Lamb. Ben is going to be our moderator for today, and Ben is Director of Economic Development for One Berkshire here based in Pittsfield, but covering all of Berkshire County. He is a very active individual in the county. He came to the Berkshires as a college student, went away to faraway places like Alaska and Belize, and then had the opportunity to return to the Berkshires to work in education, and was at Williams College for a number of years, and then moved into the public-private sector in his role at One Berkshire. He's also a city council person in North Adams and sits on the board of a number of Berkshire organizations. So Ben, take it away.
Wonderful, thank you, Kate. And thank you everyone for attending today. Very excited to be able to moderate this discussion, having been listening and reading about what we're talking about today for quite a bit, but then just living it here in the Berkshires. And so I'm excited to be able to, first off, invite or welcome our key speakers for this afternoon. So to kick it off, since 2013, Deborah and James Fallows have traveled to small communities in every part of the country that have faced economic shocks, political crises, and other serious hardships. Each place they went, they talked with teachers, business creators, mayors, religious leaders, students, artists and architects, librarians, and others involved in shaping their community's future. As they traveled around the country at low altitude in a little prop plane, they saw the patterns of rivers and hills that explain the pattern of American settlement. On the ground, they saw the emerging pattern of American reinvention. When the couple set out on their journey, they expected to find problems and poverty, and they did. But as they continued to sit down in a wide variety of cities, towns, and backyards, they were struck by the resilient spirits of people. The Fallows book is a vivid, surprising portrait of what they experienced and the civic and economic reinvention taking place in America, town by town, and generally out of view of the national media. So, without further ado, again, I would like to welcome James and Deborah Fallows to share a bit more about their story and what they've learned in their travels.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben and Catherine
and
everyone.
And OLLI.
and we'll get around to thanking everybody in specific by the end. What we thought we would do is set up a little bit of the background of what we were doing, but many of you, I think, are familiar with it already. And essentially what we've learned in the 2 years since our book came out, including in this past year when everything has been transformed. We'll do this relatively concisely so we can move into specific discussions about what's happening in the Berkshires and some of the questions that you all have highlighted in some of your past Ollie sessions. And we'll do it sandwich style. I can be sort of the dull, doughy bread, and then
I'm the PB&J in the middle. Right.
then I'm more of the doughy bread, and then you are spicy salami or kielbasa or something.
However you want your sandwich.
Yes.
Right.
So we'll go back and forth for the next 20 minutes or so, trying to lay out things we've seen essentially in the three, using the sandwich metaphor still, in three slices, sort of before, and the before being the current pandemic and economic effects, during what's been happening right now, and then after what's going to happen in the future. And I will give you a little bit of that framing. Then Deb has a couple of specifics she'll tell you about. So the before times, the before process of what led what led us to write this book is, as you may know, from roughly between 2013 and 2017, we were traveling around the country, smaller town places, mainly in our little Cirrus propeller plane, to settlements like yours, like where many of you live. We didn't go to the Berkshires this time, although we've been there before, but all around the rest of the country. And the process of discovery that led us to doing the book itself was being cumulatively quite surprised by what we saw. Because when we began this in 2013, it was sort of with tabula rasa, having been in China for a long time and not knowing what kind of the texture of interior America was like. And the process of discovery that we laid out in a lot of Atlantic posts and then in our book was essentially saying, there's something going on that generally, as Ben said in his intro, escapes the reach of the national media. That national media is optimized for national level turmoil, and it's optimized for telling you what's going on in New York and Seattle and Los Angeles, but not so much in Sioux Falls or not so much in Columbus, Mississippi, or what the rest was. And so we ended up thinking there were emerging patterns of what made smaller cities and regions more successful and less successful, which of those were things that communities could do something about, and which ones were ones they couldn't, but they could find other approaches to. So that was the mood with which we wrote the book, which came out in early 2018. What we spent much of the rest of 2018 doing was going to places we hadn't written about in the book, but were sort of led to by people who wanted to discuss these trends. We spent time in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and in Bellingham, Washington, and a fair amount more time in Charleston, West Virginia, and many other places that we hadn't written about. And that was giving us a sharper and sharper sense that there were some common patterns. And we began discussing those in our website and thinking about, on the Atlantic website, and thinking about ways that we could promulgate that message further. Then in 2019, last year, we spent much of our time doing was making a movie. So we've traveled around with filmmakers from HBO, going to communities like yours, sort of recreating an entirely different medium, the narrative we had in our book, where again, the prospect was lots of challenges any place you look. The opioid epidemic was intense then. It was pre-pandemic, but opioids were nearing a peak. Homelessness, of course. Lots of places in the Midwest. Dayton, where we traveled for reporting, was dealing with its deindustrialization. But we were sort of telling the story through this movie, which we finished the filming of last year, and that will come out early next year, as I'll tell you about. And so just before, this is now all sort of the before times of before the pandemic. So as of the moment the pandemic set in, this is late February, we had just finished all the voiceover and sort of packaging for our film. We were beginning plans to see how we could collectively tell the stories of dispersed places around the country to give them more leverage and have them feel there was some kind of movement. We also had a sense that the political future of the country as being much more cast sort of city by city and region by region than it was nationally, although of course the national dramas are very important. So the before times, the pandemic, we were all primed to tell the story in a movie and to find ways to connect stories journalistically in other fashions. And then the pandemic began. And Deb will now tell you about the one thing you've been following up with small businesses during the during time. You can
The
tell the
during time. Yeah. I just have to go back to the before time because listening to Ben's intro and hearing Jim recount all this, it just makes me, we had a really good time and it makes me miss all of the travels and seeing everything in person so much. So that is, what we bring to this at this moment is a deep sense of nostalgia, I think. We tried really hard since February to recreate as much as we could and keep the connections with people in the places where we'd been to see, okay, how are you doing? What's changed? How are you coping with this new challenge that we're all coping with? And to see where the future was going to go with all of that. And we also made some new friends, one of which I want to tell you about today. Since March, I have been on Zoom calls once or twice a week. That adds up to a lot of Zoom calls with basically the whole state of South Dakota. There's a group there called the Dakota Resources, which is an economic development group, covers South Dakota, a bunch of North Dakota and Nebraska too. People were meeting virtually because they obviously couldn't get together in person to talk about all of the issues that were changing in their town and what was challenging and how they could take advantage of these changes. And again, I was looking over some of my notes from about a month ago, which was before COVID hit in South Dakota and North Dakota. And remembering that during those times, I just felt this quite cavalier attitude coming out of those Zoom calls because people would say, we haven't had a single case in our county yet. And there wasn't really a deep sense of this is coming. It was like, we're going to skate through this. And then there was the Sturgis rally, which got people, the infamous motorcycle rally in Sturgis, which brings tens of thousands of people to this tiny town for 2 weeks out of the year. That happened and people began to get anxious. And of course now, it's, as we all know, it's the epicenter of what's going on there. So there's yet another iteration of their story. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit was the evolution of tourism and how it evolved in that area. And so these were with calls from people in small towns all over South Dakota, essentially, where they always liked to have tourists there because it was a big appendage of what they did and how they got external stimulation, both culturally and economically, and felt like it was the invitation to the outside world, to the Dakotas. So they got a lot of tourists coming into town at the beginning of the lockdowns and the pandemics from the cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, and from as far away as Brooklyn and California. People just wanted to go there because it was off the beaten path and they felt they could be safer there and it was a lot less expensive for them there and so forth. So that was a good thing until it became kind of too much of a good thing. They ran out of space in the RV parks and were trying to figure out where to put the overflow of people. The grocery stores were being drained and their supply systems weren't robust enough so that they could just call up anybody and get more supplies. And they were worried about the coronavirus coming into their town from outside of their towns. So that was part one of their response. Part two was when a lot of the tourists decided, hey, maybe this is a place where we could settle down and create a new life. There were a lot of pros to this because they were looking for young families to come and repopulate those towns and just add to the vitality and youth of the towns. And like many small towns saw that as a possible new beginning. There people were coming to the town saying, not only we'd like to bring our kids and put them in school, but we have some ideas for working remotely or for entrepreneurial ventures. And we're thinking about doing a remote business or opening up a new business in these towns. So what can we find here? So the real estate market went crazy. People wanted to buy up all the housing that was there. People were being really creative about what to do with the housing, and people were selling their houses, but then they didn't have any way to go. And something of a reality check on this, just a couple of weeks ago, I heard there was a lot of excitement in one of these towns because someone had brought in a double wide and put it on a lot, and they were going to live there. And that is a big deal in the small towns in South Dakota, because a house comes in, a family comes in, a new business comes in. The towns shared all of these ideas, and because they had similar situations, and we're trying to sort through how do we proceed with this idea of growing, and what do we need to know. So they looked around all of the assets of their towns. What kind of housing did they have? How could they repurpose some current buildings, like the old schoolhouse was being abandoned because a new one had been built? Should they just leave it, or should they turn it into a cultural center? That's a big discussion now in a little town called Lemon, where there's a very active arts group, and they're thinking, let's not tear down this old schoolhouse. There's so much potential there. So, people from largely politically on the right, people on the left, weren't paying attention to that. I have heard almost no conversations about the national politics in these sessions. It's more about, here's what's happening locally, and let's just talk about this outside the realm of politics and figure out what to do. So they've got these cases of, like, what do we do with the infrastructure of the town? Also, they needed some assessments of, look, if all these people are coming into town, we need to be able to answer their questions. What's our broadband like? They all knew actually that the broadband wasn't sufficient, but how can we ramp it up so that people can have new businesses here or work remotely? That was a really important part of the infrastructure. People will want to know about taxes. They'll want to know about utilities. They will come with their desires, especially the young families, of parks and recreation and walkability and safe schools and what can the kids do on the weekends and so forth. So, and then there was another little small twist about how all of this would be received by those who'd lived in the towns for many, many decades and wanted them to stay the same. There was worry about hurting feelings. For example, one case was there was a coffee shop in town, but one of the newcomers wanted to make a coffee shop. So people thought, this is great. We'll have some competitive coffee shops. There's room for 2 coffee shops, and especially being the Midwest, and I know because I'm from the Midwest, there were likely to be hurt feelings about the coffee shop. So how do you go through the cultural aspects of bringing in somebody new without stomping all over the people who have been there and made this town already?
And they would be expressed in a passive aggressive way. Is that correct?
That's right. Passive aggressive. We excel at that in the Midwest. So
I'm from California.
Yeah.
So we're direct. Proceed.
The solutions were very active. Do the assessments, address the psycho-emotional issues, talk about, help people work through the funding sources, and help people who are there feel like they can participate in this. If there are going to be new remote technological industries, how do we prepare the youth of the town who are already here to participate in those? We got to upskill them in some ways, and cutting through the bureaucracy of CARES funds that might come, the bureaucracy of how do we get the young people in the town to engage with new remote learning styles where they can be part of whatever is coming into the town. All of these things that they were really facing together. So I won't go on and on about this, but it was a really impressive set of months for me to listen to the collaborations, to listen to the big tent that they opened, to listen to the problems that people had around the states of South Dakota spilling over to their neighbors. And beyond all of the logistics of what they had to do, to figure out how to change the hearts and minds of people who were used to things being the way they were, and to see this as an opportunity to seize and to move on. So that's I feel like a honorary South Dakotan, and you know, maybe, who knows, maybe we will go there too.
Who knows? We know many places we
Yeah.
like there a lot. So using the sandwich metaphor again, I'm going to be a very compressed kind of pita bread or flat bread before giving you another nutritious entry from Deb. So Deb was talking about, I talked earlier about the before times. Deb is talking about the during. Here's one other during thing that I have seen as I've been connecting with people not in South Dakota or other places. As many of you are aware, for smaller towns and non-coastal regions now, there's been a change that's been bad, and there's a change that is potentially good. The change that is bad, in addition to the bad for just the country and the world that the economic and pandemic crisis is causing, is that the same small businesses and startups that have been so indispensable in remaking the character of downtowns and of smaller town cities, and of having startup enterprises and bringing new people into towns, those new small businesses have been disproportionately affected by the overall shutdown. And that is something that's a nationwide trend that cities are trying to deal with. The offsetting change that is potentially good is one that Deb was mentioning, which is a beginning probably of a long-term geographical reassessment of where people want to live, work, raise their children, et cetera. New York, Seattle, LA are going to be there, but there may be new traction for people working remotely and with ripple effects like those Deb was mentioning. The other thing we've seen, and I'll just lay this out in summary form, we can talk about it later, is that many of the traits that distinguish successful cities that we wrote about before seem all the more important now in this time of crisis. That is adaptability and being able to turn, for example, small towns that decided to liberalize liquor laws, so you could have takeout beer and wine from restaurants, and having them takeout businesses, and just repurposing buildings and all the rest. The deliberate cultivation of networks for emotional and commercial and financial and educational and childcare support. The emergence of civic leaders who think that the welfare of this community in the long run matters to them. And we have some illustrations, and an acute awareness of what makes each town particular and distinctive, what it is about this place that can allow it to survive the during and build to the after. Deb is going to say something more about during. I'm going to have a brief coda about after, and then we'll be happy to have discussions.
And I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about the before, which has gone into the during. And this is a story that I want to tell you because you're such a strong arts community, a set of communities where you live. And the arts are, it was one of the most surprising things to us, I think, in our travels was to learn how important the arts were to a town defining itself, and a town not only bringing it economic possibility too, but a core and a texture and a way to move through tensions and a way to diffuse bad discussions and a way to deal with his past history, for example, in Mississippi, through the arts. There is one town in particular that really stood out for us because they essentially leapfrogged from being a copper mining town that was going great guns about a century ago, and then completely failed when the copper mine fell apart and the mine was sold and abandoned, and there was essentially nothing left of the town that it had been built to. So what were they going to do? Their very creative solution was to focus on something that they knew was important to the town and the residents of the town, and that was the arts. A lot of people came to this tiny town of Ajo, Arizona, which is about 120 miles south of Phoenix.
And which we described in our book.
Yes, we did. And in the middle of the desert, they have great light there. So a lot of the people who were the snowbirds would come there and practice their art. It has, I think that, and the strength of that, it was not just this one town itself, but the people who were behind this movement recognized that they needed to bring in the groups who had always lived there, the Mexicans who had worked in the mine, the Native Americans who had a big reservation right next to them, they're called the Tohono O'odham, and the Anglos who lived in town. So together, they all focused on the arts and environment as a way to rebuild their town. They had plenty of assets to deploy on a big scale since it was built as this beautiful Spanish revival town with a great center plaza of grass and palm trees and so forth, which they grew into a natural gathering point for any kind of festivals and so forth that they wanted to do. They had a lot of abandoned buildings around this plaza, which they repurposed from leftover shops that were closed into galleries and into performance spaces and a theater. And they encourage people to participate. So like if you go down the streets of Ajo now, everyone is an artist. Everyone has little sculptures in their front yard or what are those, like tiles and things that people made and put them all over town. And they repurposed the old beautiful school buildings, which were then left vacant after the mine closed in place of a new school, into little apartments for artists and residents who would come and bring different perspectives to their town. And the whole place began to flourish. It was a huge amount of work. And one of the big keys to this was one woman in particular who knew her way around funding sources at every level, from the county level up through the national level and local philanthropies. Without her, I don't think they would have gotten where they are, because cutting through the bureaucracies of how can we find help? How do we ask for the help? What do we do with the help when we get it? And how do we get more help after that was really a critical piece of what they had done. All of this goes to really changing their civic story from being a mining town to being an arts town, that now during COVID, well, they're kind of holding steady, I would say, mainly because people who went there in the off season are staying there, like you see in a lot of places in the South, and people are still relying on a fairly modest investments in their lifestyle and carrying on and helping each other with this built up trust of what they had. So this is kudos to the artists out there, and to those creative enough to see how to work within that system to not only be creative, but to help all the others around them too.
So briefly about the after. What's significant about joining right now in this LA meeting, as opposed to 2 weeks ago or a month ago, is that we can see more clearly an after. There is the news of vaccines, so we can imagine it's not going to be years and years until there's some change in how people can live. There is change in the political environment, which is not going to transform everything, because I think there's still likely to be a political split between the White House and the Senate, but will change a lot of things. And I think it is foreseeable that starting next year, there's going to be a lot of experimentation and support for dealing with all the economic and regional and other dislocations and inequalities that have emerged. And so we think what Deb and I are going to do, coincident with the launch of our movie very early next year on HBO, when we'll launch a new website too, is to try to do everything we can personally to connect people like you in the Berkshires with your counterparts in inland Oregon or in Tennessee or in rural Texas or whatever, to try to build a momentum for the place where we think the actual inventiveness is going to come from. And because there is so much of this locally conscious innovation going on, and ways to shore it up in shoring up local journalism, shoring up local entrepreneurship, finding ways to improve broadband connections to rural America, et cetera, a list you're familiar with. So I think in the after times, the kinds of things that you are involved in the Berkshires will be part of what we view as of an even more important stage in public evolution, because the nation has obvious problems, just crisis ones of the economic and pandemic slump of the past year, and long-term ones as well. So we think we passed the baton to you, and we hope to help you carry that baton in the years ahead. So that's our opening pitch.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I will say you couldn't see me, but I was nodding my head and smiling a lot as you were saying that. And I'm sure all of our panelists and our attendees were also experiencing a similar reaction to much of what you were saying, kind of from that Berkshire, Ollie lens and perspective. So I really appreciate that overview. I'm also a huge fan of the before times, during times, and after times model. I think that's brilliant, and it's something that we should all use more regularly. So thank you for that really great introduction, which adds an additional layer on top of what we've all read and heard in terms of kind of our pre-learning before today. Now, however, I would actually like to kind of transition this conversation and create that dialogue here to really kind of collide the voices together. So between what you all bring to the table and then what we have from our three fantastic panelists. So to kick that off, I'm going to give each of them a little bit of time to introduce themselves and share a little bit of information about what they do, what their job is, what their role is here in the Berkshires, and also the organizations that they work for, because I think that will carry a lot into our conversation going forward. So to start that off, I'm going to have Laura Brennan, who is a senior planner at Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, give us a little introduction of herself and BRPC.
Sure. All right. Thank you. So when we did a little bit of a planning session last week for this conversation, Catherine pointed out to me, which is certainly well taken, that a lot of people are not super familiar with what Berkshire Regional Planning Commission does. We're behind the scenes on a lot of things, and so I'm happy to share a bit of information on that. I'll do a quick few slides here to give a summary. I think probably as people see this, they'll say, okay, yeah, that's them that's doing that, or we have encountered you throughout the region on a number of different fronts. So just a quick overview of our agency. BRPC is one of 13 regional planning commissions throughout the Commonwealth. We're legislatively enabled, so we were established through Mass General Law, the Regional Planning Law, and the Berkshire Planning Council was organized in 1966 through a vote of 10 cities and towns in the region, and over time, all 32 municipalities joined with us. We have a citizen commission of representatives from all 32 of those municipalities. The delegates come from our local planning boards in each town. And then the professional staff at this time of planners includes about 25 people. We are based in Pittsfield, but certainly work throughout the region. So what do? We have a range of programs, departments, I guess, but we call them programs, and those are community and economic development, community planning, data and information services, emergency preparedness, environmental and energy, regional initiatives and services, public health, transportation, and administration. So where do you see us? Our Community and Economic Development Department is usually coordinating any housing rehab projects that you see throughout the region. We're also the program that has been organizing the Community Development Block Grant support for micro enterprise businesses that have you've probably seen in the paper or learned about through various agencies that you work with. So supporting businesses with emergency grant funds for anything 5 employees or fewer. Our land use planning would come out of community planning. So if a town or city is doing a new master or comprehensive plan, or if they're doing an outdoor space and recreation plan, that's the group that would work with them. Our data and information services runs the website Berkshire Benchmarks. So if you've looked for data on our region, different demographic information, that's where to find it. Emergency preparedness includes hazard mitigation, also vulnerability preparedness, as well as some public health responses. Our energy and environmental program deals with brownfields cleanup, and we run a revolving loan fund. The regional initiatives, one example of that is the outdoor recreation plan for Berkshire County that we launched earlier this year in partnership with Milltown Capital. Our public health program works with all of the public health departments throughout the county and is also the organization, one of the partner organizations of the Berkshire Opioid Abuse Prevention Collaborative, as well as Age-Friendly Berkshires. We've been involved with that. Transportation program, just as an example, has been helping a number of communities with complete streets projects to make sure that our roadways are safer and more easily used by people of all ages and abilities. And then I include in here Berkshire's Tomorrow, which is actually our nonprofit entity. And that has traditionally been focused on education. But in 2020, we have utilized that nonprofit status to become a fiscal agent for COVID response, including emergency food for students. And you can see here an example of people putting together care packages over April vacation week. We sent home 500 care packages to families in Pittsfield. So just a quick overview of the kinds of things that BRPC does, and you can learn more on our website.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I apologize for the bang in the background on my microphone right now. So that you don't have to listen to that, I will turn it over to Carrie Holland, who's the managing director at Milltown Capital.
Oops. Hello there. Let me share my screen as well. Let's see. Come here. All right. Can everybody see? Great. So thank you for the quick introduction. My name is Carrie Holland with Milltown. We are a private investment group focused in the Berkshires primarily. And we kind of see ourselves as a member contributing, serving as a platform for community revitalization. So we're doing a lot of things. We're relatively new. We were founded in 2016. Our chairman, Dave Mixter, is from the area and sort of chose geographically the Berkshires to come home and invest in this area, really with a community-minded approach. And so we've been busy for the last 4 years, just really trying to drive that impact. Our mission, simply put, is to expand and improve the quality and quantities of opportunities to live, work, and play well in the Berkshires. We're really looking at this as a community holistically throughout the community. So it's improving the economic opportunities and job creation and job potential for people both living here and who might consider moving here. The living component, we recognized that some of the, in a very specific way, real estate, a lot of the housing stock is quite old in Pittsfield specifically. There's been a lot of deferred maintenance on a lot of the rental units. And so a big focus of ours shifted early on to get into that real estate component and focus on specific neighborhoods where we would invest heavily on deferred maintenance and a lot of renovation and rehabilitation. We are also now getting into the ground up build, which we can cover a little bit more in that public-private partnership component. And then that way of living well and playing well too. So that's sort of the recreational opportunities, the community opportunities. How do you enjoy yourself in an area? And we see that really as sort of a distinguishing element that the Berkshires can really stand apart from a lot of other regions. We have so much rich things to do, and traditionally that's been recognized in the cultural space. And so another area that we're really focusing on developing and supporting is the outdoor recreation space. I think a lot of locals know very well that outdoor recreation is a great thing to do in the Berkshires, but we're also trying to expand that as almost like a marketing tool to get other people to move here. It's becoming much more popular and quality of life driver for people. So we're really trying to promote and just build out a little bit of the infrastructure around the outdoor recreation space. And then sort of the last pillar of how we get involved focuses in on community development, and that's where a lot of our philanthropy work comes into play. So, a lot of community health, and I use health very broadly. That's economic health, it's physical health, it's mental health, it's sort of the overall well-being of the city and the state and of mind for people. So I use that term very broadly. But we have a lot of philanthropic efforts that really dovetail nicely with our more traditional investment areas as well. And so just as this is an area that I thought I'd call out specifically, since it's one that we've more recently spent a lot of energy on, and it's gotten a lot of attention in the area. So really shifting our focus quite heavily to outdoor recreation and how to build that as a real, very strong, recognized feature of the Berkshires, both for economic value as well as that quality of life value. So we sort of started dabbling in this a few years ago, supporting some of the larger infrastructure projects and conceptual projects. And then in the last couple of years, have really moved forward with a bit more agency on a few large projects. Again, partnering with Laura on the outdoor recreation plan, partnering with One Berkshire on a lot of marketing initiatives. We purchased a local ski hill that we can see from Ben's building here very nicely. So there's a lot of partnership, and it's really exciting to see a lot of energy in this space. And we've got a lot of exciting energy that we're going to be putting into this outdoor recreation component throughout the county in the coming years. So that's kind of a brief touch on Milltown, and looking forward to talking more throughout the conversation.
Fantastic, thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have Ben Sosne, who's the Executive Director for the Berkshire Innovation Center. So Ben, take it away.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for everyone for including me here. This is really wonderful, and I guess we'll get into our personal stories a little bit later. I am the Executive Director of the Berkshire Innovation Center. I will share also a quick PowerPoint to tell you a little bit about the BIC if we don't, for those who are not familiar with the organization. We we're a nonprofit public-private partnership. Our building has been in the works for a number of years, and took some sort of grinding those wheels at the state level to get it done. And I know a lot of people on this call and in our region were critical to that. But we're really focused on the tech, advanced manufacturing, and life science sectors, which are so important to our economy here in the Berkshires, that sort of diverse economy that we need, and historically so important. We have a brand new facility, 23,000 square feet, We had our grand opening on February 28th, 2020. I like to point that out because on February 29th, this was leap year. Berkshire Medical Center had their first COVID patient. In fact, it was the first in the Commonwealth that hospitalized in the Commonwealth. So on the one hand, we can say, oh, timing wasn't great. On the other hand, I think, boy, I think we're really fortunate to have gotten such a great opening day event in with so many people in the building, rubbing shoulders and hugging and toasting and enjoying food and wine. So I think, I don't know when we'll next have, 350 people in our building, but I look forward to it. We're all about shared resources and collective wisdom and getting people together, whether it's our board is half academic partners and half nonprofit organizations, whether they be educational organizations or otherwise. Advanced R&D capabilities. We try to be a winged R&D wing to a lot of our companies here in the Berkshires, both to startups, but also the real focus is a lot on existing businesses, legacy businesses who have been here quite a long time, and how do we help them grow and expand and really, and sometimes pivot for times like this, but also pivot looking 5 to 10 years out. And sort of share their collective wisdom as they think about it. That ranges from very large companies like General Dynamics, who obviously has a huge footprint here in the Berkshires and a tremendous team, to smaller organizations who are just starting up and kind of bring a different type of agility to the table. Again, I talk about that a lot. That's sort of our catchphrase, collective wisdom always wins. We try to bring our local academic partners, like I said, our companies, whether they are technology companies. And again, we're not focused on one sector. We have, obviously, there's a rich history of paper and plastics and electrical engineering here in the Berkshires, but there's some new exciting tech companies like VidMob or Dive Technologies that are really starting to grow and take a foothold. So we try to kind of create that soup or smoothie or whatever you want to call it, where you sort of mix expertise and share that wisdom to move everyone forward. We're also very much, and something I'm learning about, and I'm sure you can't see the details of this slide, and that's okay, it's not really the point, a gateway to a larger ecosystem. Massachusetts, and also New York State, but Massachusetts I'll think about a little bit more. And you saw in the pandemic response, the statewide ecosystem that they've built up, and it was something that was built up, particularly in the last decade, to really create these channels of communications and nodes around the Commonwealth, so that when something like this happens, Massachusetts has been able to respond unbelievably in terms of for example, the PPE response and the way that whether it's MIT working, with Moderna or whoever to move the ball along on all kinds of projects. Here in the Berkshires, obviously, we're not Cambridge, and we're kind of separated from those centers. But I think in many ways the BIC can be the gateway to that larger ecosystem. And for our companies, it's a pipeline also, hopefully a gateway for outsiders, especially talent, because that's what we're really looking for, to come west. That Western Mass does not necessarily mean Amherst. Nothing against Amherst, but there are a few more miles. This is just a picture actually from last night. We are, we're really thinking about the talent pipeline. We're very focused on the talent pipeline and educational initiatives because, as I said, we want to, not only, we want to really give our organizations a stream of talent and give our young people, make them aware of some of the amazing sort of advanced R&D or tech jobs that careers that might be here. I grew up here. We'll talk about that a little more later. And I raise my children here and I bring them to every Art and Culture Institute, and I love it, and we adore every outdoor recreation spot. And I did that as a child too. My parents took me to those same places, but nobody ever took me to General Dynamics or Boyd Technologies or Lenco Armored Vehicles and saw what was going on there. It just was a whole world that I was never ever introduced to. So I'll move on there. And again, this is just, again, we're a gateway, we're a platform, and we're a center. So I will stop my share. And
Great. Thank you, Ben. Thanks to all three of you. Obviously, we have a ton of talent and information and organizational involvement in this room. And so we want to jump right into more of a dialogue amongst the group so that we can get as much as we can today out into the universe. So, you know, there was a couple really key topics that I think we all took away both from the book and from your website and everything else that you have out there kind of in the internet sphere, especially right now, that, you know, had some really clean, direct lines that we could draw to what's going on in the Berkshires. And kind of that first piece, which Ben and Carrie both started to touch on a little bit in their introductions, is that the civic story, that idea of, you know, what is the story that's being told? What is the story being shared? And in the Berkshires in particularly, how is it being shared as a tool for both recruitment and retention of, you know, the next generation and the next iteration of what the Berkshire economy and the Berkshire community is going to look like? So to kind of weave that together, you know, I'm going to kind of target Carrie and Ben here, but I think a conversation really about, you know, the pieces that brought you back here. What were those, the kind of driving forces? And then, you know, if there's an opportunity for some question answer there with the Fallows as well, to dig into what does that mean and how does that play out in both the short term and the long term. So I'll kind of leave it to you to take that away.
Thank you. I'll hop in. You know, I would say I left the Berkshires as an 18-year-old to go to New York City for college and stayed through law school and stayed for close to 20 years. But I would say I never really left. I came back at every opportunity. And I think I always knew, you know, I really appreciated my childhood here in the Berkshires. And when my children got to that sort of preschool age, I wanted to come back. I knew I wanted to come back, and actually my wife is a graduate of Williams College, so she wanted to come back. But we always thought of it as coming back to you know, because it was a great place to be a child and to give our kids that experience. I will say what I didn't appreciate, and now do, or maybe I just didn't think about it that way, was what an amazing place it is to be a parent and to work and to be involved in a community. And so, yeah, I enjoy being a parent here. It's wonderful, but the focus of this maybe is a great place to work. And I think the size of the Berkshires is really manageable, and you are able to, I'm always amazed at the ability to dive in and really tackle problems. And, you know, if you have an idea, people are willing to listen, and there's a spirit in the Berkshires that is really attractive in terms of people interested in making a difference, and not just interested in, but finding themselves able to, so they want to do it again, which is really, it gets your kind of, it creates this cycle, which gets your juices flowing, frankly.
Yeah, I think that's a very similar line for me as well. I grew up in Pittsfield. I went to school in Pittsfield. I left for college, and I, you know, all throughout my 20s, I bounced around. I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., down in Virginia, out to Oregon, spent a good amount of time in the South, in Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, and then had a few stints internationally in Southeast Asia and Italy. And I just kept coming back to the Berkshires, and not just physically to come back and visit family and friends, but my heart just kept coming back here too. So it was just continuously pulling. And I remember a very defining moment. I was in Cambodia, actually, with my husband, who also grew up in Pittsfield. And we just said, you know, what's the next step? We were kind of getting a little burnt out in DC at the time. So what's next for us? And we just thought, you know, the Berkshires that's the dream. Like, how do we get back to the Berkshires? And we kind of made excuses of, well, you know, what are we going to do for work? We're, we're in DC centric jobs, and our friends there. We know that there's a lot of things that we like to do, all the outdoor recreation components, and sitting on Tanglewood on the lawn and visiting Mass Mocha and all of the things. We knew those were here, so we knew that was a good check. But like, how do we do it? I realized you just have to do it. And if people like Sam and I, my husband Sam, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? And we just kind of said, let's commit to figuring this out. And it's been amazing. And really, when I think about our life in DC and I think about our life in the Berkshires, there's things that will never be in the Berkshires that we enjoyed in Washington, DC, but there are certainly many things in DC that would never have been there that the Berkshires has. And so really that, much of what Ben was saying, there's such an opportunity to try things here. The barrier of entry is much lower. So if you have an entrepreneurial or a community project that you want to try, you can do that in a place like Pittsfield. Financially, it's not as overwhelming to consider. You have the access to the municipal leadership to kind of pull it together. So you can really try things. The barrier of entry is much lower. And we just found that moving back, although many of our friends from high school were no longer here, but actually many of them had moved back also. And so we weren't just kind of moving back to a foreign land. We were really joined by a lot of we kind of had a community to go back to and friend group to go back to. And then we met all of these great other people that we never knew. I didn't know Ben Lamb. I didn't know Ben Sosne. I didn't know Laura Brennan. I didn't know all of these people. And it's so wonderful because you get to know them. It's easier to know them. I've made many more friends moving back to the Berkshires than I actually did down in DC when you're, surrounded by people, because you have those obvious connections and networks to fall into. So it's been wonderful moving back. And then of course we've got 2 kids, so it's a way easier to raise kids and have a fulfilling work-life balance in the Berkshires for sure.
I think, just knowing the folks here as well, this is sort of to Deborah and James, and, you referred to that idea of local patriots and people that are really kind of like the paramount local voices. And so just, from your perspective, I'm wondering, how do you see these narratives of folks that have gone out from a community and then come back, kind of that yo-yo effect that happens, whether that's short-term or long-term. And I'm just kind of curious how you see that playing out.
Go ahead.
Okay, so these are happily, these are familiar stories.
Yeah.
We've heard versions of this in Duluth, in Charleston, West Virginia, in Columbus, Ohio, Fresno,
Redlands.
Yeah,
Bend.
That's true, all over the country. And you could put your geography onto the Berkshires and you say, yeah, that we've heard this before. I have a question back to you. How unusual are you? I mean, we saw increasing numbers of young people who had the will and desire, like you're saying, to do this, but how many of you are there, and what the people you left behind in DC or wherever you were, New York, wherever you were before, what do they think of you now? Do they think you're crazy? Do they want to do what you did? What is the story getting bigger or what?
For me, I think I've always been drinking the Berkshire's Kool-Aid and trying to like hand out cups to everybody. So for a lot of my friends down in DC, it wasn't that surprising. But the fact that we actually did it and could figure it out from an employment perspective was sort of like, wow, you guys actually did it. And, DC is such there's a lot of people who move in and out of DC. So actually my closest friend group, they've all moved elsewhere since then. So one of my friends is back in Denver, another friend is back in Pennsylvania, another is in New Jersey, another's in New York. So I think a lot of it maybe is just, where I am in my age and my friends where we are in our age, but actually a lot of people have started kind of migrating out of of the cities a bit, and closer to some home bases also. So I think people were excited because I think they knew how much I love the Berkshires, and they're excited that I could figure it out. And it took a little bit of creativity. And that's sort of the engagement with a lot of my friends who have not moved back to the Berkshires, who would like to. And they're kind of like, how did you do it? You know, I'm in this role that's sort of central to a Boston market. And how did you do that? How did you get back? And really, I just keep saying it takes some creativity, and it takes a step to just commit to trying it. And if it doesn't work, you can always move back to the cities, you know, so.
And if I could just say one other thing, as Deb said, we've had conversations hearteningly just like this all over the place. And there's almost an identical conversation that's part of our movie in Charleston, West Virginia, with your contemporaries who'd been filmmaking in LA and other places who come back to Charleston. I think the accumulation of stories like yours really matters. Because for centuries, the American narrative has been, you go from the farm to the small city and you go to Chicago or New York or whatever. But having all the stories of people who have choices and choose to go back where they are from, or they invent a new place they are from, I think that can have a cumulative effect in sort of changing the future of regions like yours. So really glad to hear it.
Yeah, I would say that I would have answered the question, so I won't waste the time, almost to a T to Carrie's answer, is that I have often, you know, passed the Berkshires Kool-Aid around, and the response when I moved back was not shocking that I wanted to do it and that I did do it. A little bit surprised as that question of how'd you do it, which, you know, a lot of people I think frustrates me. They'll go on to Indeed or something and be looking for a job that lines up with their current job. And it's like, guys, you got to sort of, you know, there is plenty to get involved in here. You got to kind of take that leap. But I've noticed more and more doing it. I convinced my own brother to move back from Brooklyn. And, you know, there's kind of a snowball effect the more times you hear from people who have done it, and whether they grew up here or, you know, like Ben went to school here or had a lot of, you know, frankly, from the Berkshires, a lot of people went to summer camp in the Berkshires or went to Tanglewood as a kid, or, you know, visited Mass Mocha and kind of had a great weekend here. And we're like, how are you doing it? You moved from, you know, a city back here. How'd you do that? Where do you work? What do you know? What's winter like? You know, all these sort of questions that, but I sort of see more and more and more. And if anything, as we all know, the pandemic has brought people who may have been here as a second homeowner or may come back to see their parents or friends. You know, obviously they're scooping up real estate around the Berkshires and are approaching it, I think, from a little different angle, not just, oh, we'll buy this and we'll enjoy, you know, the culturals, but what's really going on here? Let's get involved. And that's great to see.
Yeah, just to one more point on this, you know, when you think of like a market scalability component, Ben and I are actually, we're like a target demographic, but we really want the Lauras too. You know, we want, the Berkshires population is only so big. So of that population, only a small percentage of people realistically will actually move back. So how do we get to the giant market of the Laura Brennans of the world and get them to come to the Berkshires as well? So, right. You know, I think that's not something that's lost on us also. So there's the recruitment of the friends, but certainly the recruitment and retention of the Lauras of the world too.
Right. I came here for work, 15 years ago now. Quite honestly, took a job that was part-time and unbenefited just to get my foot in the door in Berkshire nonprofit cultural institution. That was doable because it's affordable, because I could do that knowing that I was going to be working my way up if I had to, you know, and it works. Not to say that that's what everybody who wants to move here has to do. By far, I was in a situation where I was able to do that. I usually say there's nothing like the zeal of a convert, right? I came to the Berkshires, it welcomed me here. It the community wraps their arms around you and gets you involved, kicking or screaming. I was, part of my assignment at work was to go volunteer checking people in at chamber networking events, and I got to know people that way. And from there, I met people that I then, became part of a book club with. And, it's a place that welcomes you, that involves you right away, whether that's I'm not a joiner, but I am now. So I do think that there's a lot of opportunity here for just some response to what Caroline and Ben were saying about people not being quite sure if they can do it. Is it transferable? Is it what I do in Boston doable now? I think that's one of those silver linings of 2020, is that we've all proven that we can do a lot of things wherever we are. And so I think that there's a shift in people's mindset around where you can work and what do you want your environment to be? What do you want your commute to be? Do you even want one? So I think that we can really take advantage of that. And there was a mention of remote work or opening up a new business during the Fallows initial presentation. There have been lots of discussions over the last 5-6 years in the Berkshires about how do we encourage more people to set up shop in the Berkshires but work remotely. Bits and pieces here and there. Can we get a couple people come to Lenox and a couple people come to Williamstown? Now we're talking volume. We can really accommodate those kinds of intentions for large groups of people. And it's not piecemeal anymore. So I would just say I think there's some good opportunities there.
And I think something that is sort of a vein that I'm pulling from these three actually leads nicely on is this idea of a network, whether it's your family and friend network or it's a network that you build once you land here. Because we are a small area, 128,000 people in the entire county, but you're able to make those really meaningful relationships and connections. And a piece of that too also comes into what are the larger relationships that begin to impact the broader kind of ecosystem as a whole. And one way that we see a lot of that in working with these partners and others is in that public and private partnership piece. And so just kind of transitioning the conversation a little bit, I know of many of them. I am in many of them with these three individuals, let alone others. But I kind of want to drill down into what does that mean in the Berkshires? And then from the Fallows perspective, when you think, public-private relationships, what does that shape take on and how does that play out in kind of similar landscapes? So, I know all three of you are involved in different levels of partnership. So if anyone wants to just jump on that, and we'll take the lead as it goes. I'll pick on someone if I need to. That's fine too.
Being too polite.
Well, Ben, I know that you're actually the executive director of an organization that is literally a public-private partnership. So why don't you take it away and start us off?
I think the biggest role that the BIC can play, and something that is we're really a bridge between our industry partners and our academic partners. And one thing that we've taken a close look at, obviously, we have academic partners ranging from Berkshire Community College to Williams College and UMass and RPI and beyond, but also the public school system here in the Berkshires. And I think the high school is something that we really tried to focus on. And we see a desire on both ends, desire from industry to really focus in on our high school students and show them the opportunities here in the Berkshires, show them transition that mindset of manufacturing from dark, dirty, and dangerous to sterile and sophisticated, and from the students who are increasingly curious about these jobs, especially right now. Anything in the med tech arena is particularly interesting, and we have some companies doing great work in that space. So how can we partner with both our sort of the industry partners and our public schools to create some new ways of thinking about education and ways.
We may have just seen. Oh.
Frankly, we're in the final week. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you were just freezing up a little bit there.
Sorry about that. We're in the final weeks of a program, and we knew, or we hoped, that the high school students would be engaged, and they are, and they seem to be really, really enjoying it and enjoy visiting companies and learning about what's here. But the engagement from the companies to work with the high school students has been, almost more eye-opening, as they are really just into it. They thank me before I thank them for participating. And so I think the way that, to the extent that we continue to look at that bridge, and obviously then working with the sort of ecosystem that the Commonwealth has set up, and sort of these quasi-governmental agencies like the Mass Life Science Center, like the Mass Tech Collaborative, it's really, it's something that I personally enjoy, but I think it has legs. And I know the Fallows in their books spoke about a engineering elementary school. I believe it was, and correct me on the town, I believe it was down south.
Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah, Greenville,
Yep.
South Carolina, which I actually read that a few times, because it just caught me like, oh, wow. I can see right before my eyes all the teachers, the teachers from industry who would love to get in there and do it, and the students who would just, they're eating this stuff up. So how can I maybe, or the BIC, enter into that space in some way? And maybe there's a twist on that, I've been thinking, because we are now living in a virtual world, or at least there's ways to connect us in different ways. So that's something in your book that I know really grabbed me.
Yeah, I was trying to think when we're talking about this topic. I said, okay, what are like a couple of really good projects to talk about that Milltown is involved in with public-private partnerships? And then I realized it's kind of like all over our world, whether we sort of highlight it at the forefront. We're really interested because financial resources are a little slimmer out this way than perhaps a large metropolitan. Concentrating dollars, I think, is pretty important. It really helps move the needle between sort of having an okay project and a really good project that can really reach its full potential, instead of just kind of getting it along. And so I think that's where we're seeing gap filling on both sides. In real estate, for instance, we can get a development project to a certain point, but there's a big discrepancy between building costs and the market rate rental appetite for renters. And so by having just a little bit of the public tax incentive, that helps bridge that gap, and then all of a sudden the project makes sense. Or one of the projects we were involved in, the building a turf field at the community college. It was for the whole community to use, a lot of youth sports. We've got a very rich athletics community here in the Berkshires. And it was the first publicly community accessed turf field. And the state funding got it to one point. We had a little bit of extra city funding come in, and then private foundation dollars and donors came on top and really made it a special place with the full build out, so that it can host really great events and it's not just a field. So I think we see this across our world, and we've specifically worked with Ben, with Laura, with Ben Lamb and Ben Sosne and Laura on all of these projects, whether it's a planning project, service support for businesses, educational programs, entrepreneurial support. So it's really like the stacking of the funding just helps make projects make more sense to actually do and realize their full potential, instead of just kind of being a minimal viable product. It's like really good. So I think that's where we see a lot of the state funding come into play. And we look forward to pursuing more projects with that public-private partnership.
Just one comment to add on to here that did not make it into the book, in the story of Greenville, South Carolina, and the Elementary School of Engineering. After we wrote about this, I got emails from retired people around Greenville who had moved to areas and said, how can I please put me in touch with the people in the school? I know how to do this. You know, this is my area of expertise. I really I want to be part of this too, which is a great extra bridge to the part of the population who has got plenty of energy and plenty of experience and needs a way, find a way in. So that's it. That's my point.
Yeah, the more advocates and sort of people who are accountable to the project also, I think that just makes it that much better as well. So if the city is bought in, if the state's bought in, if foundations are bought in, if private community members who gave $5 to the project are bought in, it just is better for the community, I think, and it's more successful. So we definitely like a good group of people coming in to support the project financially, their own talents, anyway.
I mean, we talk about it when Berkshire being a connective tissue organization in terms of a regional perspective, which I think, to Carrie and Ben's point, that brings a ton of voices and stakeholders to the table. But one thing I wanted to, just identify and see if Laura had any comments on this is kind of as another regional agency, specifically regional planning, right? What are those relationships like in your sphere and how do they play out? And then we're actually going to jump over to Q&A almost right after this because you're all doing such a great job of sharing information.
So I would just add to this conversation that I think it's not always necessarily public-private that cleanly divided, but also interagency partnerships. So in the last couple of years, I think I've seen a lot more concrete not just relationships, but actual arrangements between like our organization and another agency that's in the Berkshires. So for example, as we're providing these micro enterprise grants to business owners, we're also then routing them through the Mass Small Business Development Center network so that they can have long-term business counseling. And if they're 5 or fewer employees right now, perhaps they want to stay that way and they want to just become more effective or nimble as their very small enterprise, or maybe they're looking to grow and they can use that business counseling. So we've been sitting around the same tables, I think, as economic development practitioners for a long time and talking about collaboration and saying we collaborate because we're in the same room. But more and more, I am seeing true partnerships and true, as I said, arrangements between these agencies. And sometimes it's a couple of public agencies, sometimes it's a mix. Sometimes it's 2 private entities that have a common goal and a common intention for the community. So I think that's for me, when we hear about the public-private partnerships, it's about making them really concrete. So.
Absolutely. So with that, because we're a little over time right now, and we have seen some really great questions kind of trickling in, and I know that Kate, who just popped in to join us, has been capturing those. Just in case I don't have time to do it, I just want to thank all of you for this could have been a half-day symposium just based on how people were sharing, stories and really great content. So I sincerely appreciate all of you and the time that you took with us today. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Kate and let her take it away for our Q&A for the day.
Okay, we have questions in a wide variety of areas, but I'm going to start one for Deb. And that is, there was a question about the involvement of Native American communities in South Dakota. And this is from a person who now lives in the Berkshires, Howard Shapiro, and is very active here, but who lived in Michigan for many years. So in the work that you've been doing since the pandemic began, has the Native American community been involved in those discussions? And if so, how?
It's a great question, and it's a complicated answer because we have worked with and seen towns involved with the Native American communities in Maine, in South Dakota, in a number of places, in Arizona,
and California.
And I'm trying to figure out how to say this. The non-Native American population is acutely aware of wanting to bring in the voices from the Native American population to participate in whatever decisions it is that they're working on, from culturally to education to healthcare, you name it. And I would say it is very difficult. It understandably, there is a lot of trust still needs to be built up between those two communities. And it's a matter of truly listening and appreciating what each side is trying to do and accepting the contributions that each side can make. And help me out here. How would you describe this more?
This is one of the ancestral issues in U.S. history, one of the ancestral sins and fractures. And we've seen different places where there are varying degrees of integration. I think probably the worst is in South Dakota.
Yeah.
I think that's where there's the most polarization. Probably in Arizona, that's where in southern Arizona with the Tohono O'odham and the Latino population and the Anglo population, they are ahead of the South Dakota situation. So if we had answers to this right now, we would be ahead of most people in the U.S. But it's one of the great issues of our history.
One thing I would say to add is that in Arizona, the reason I think it has worked more easily and with more depth is that the population of the Native Americans there were brought in at the very beginning of revitalizing the town of Ajo as one of the three critical parts. So their voices were there from the get-go, and they've continued to be incorporated rather than seeming like an afterthought or seeming like something that you had to fix. Not every place that works, but I think that was a key there.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to Michael Wilcox, who's the town moderator in Alford, and who has just finished, I think, the third of his OLLI courses on Native Americans in the Berkshires. And he'll have another one during the winter session for OLLI. So if you're into learning about the Native American history of the Berkshires, OLLI has some great resources, and Michael has a lot of knowledge there. So this is another question first guided to the Fallows, and because the Berkshires are a region, we have 32 towns, and we're that New England small town government, make our own decisions kind of place. What kinds of strategies have you seen that have been successful for cross-regional cooperation and growth?
This is something that's been really interesting to us too, because the U.S. Political landscape is so different. California has many times more people than Pennsylvania does, but Pennsylvania has like 5 times as many units of government as California does because it's an older entity, and of course, so is Massachusetts as well. I think the most interesting progressive example we've seen of regional collaboration is in Danville, Virginia. Danville is the furthest south part of Virginia, just before you hit North Carolina, if you're going down from Richmond. And their natural ecosystem involves lots of different counties, 2 states, parts of a 3rd state. And they found really interesting ways to try to have a shared Danville regional, southwestern Virginia, western North Carolina sensibility. We've seen some less successful examples. For example, Duluth, Minnesota, and Superior, Wisconsin, which are one conurbation, but they're divided by a state line. But I would say that if I were trying to look for a regional consciousness in Western Massachusetts and New York and Vermont, I would be talking with the people at the Danville Regional Foundation, because they've really gone a long way. You agree?
I do agree. And it cuts through a lot of different critical sectors, through the health sector, through education, through the churches, and through not really agricultural, but all of the services that come through places like the churches and their service groups.
And then the Central Valley Foundation in California, which is, the Central Valley of California would be the poorest state in the union if it were a state. And it's the cities of Fresno and Stockton and Modesto and Merced. And they are trying to have some kind of entity as a region to deal with their public health and poverty and other issues there.
Okay, thank you. So I hope everybody's making notes here. Danville Community Foundation.
We were all writing them down, believe me.
Okay.
It's Danville Regional Foundation.
Yep.
Danville Regional Foundation.
And the name is intentional.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So another question to start with the Fallows is, as you look towards the future, what are some things that you think will be different in small towns and rural communities 3 years from now?
Well, I think there will be more of you young people who have moved there and are figuring out ways to make it work. I think that I hope that the people who currently live there will have embraced the change that happened. That, you know, it's okay to have people from the outside. It's okay to have wacky ideas coming in. One of the things I truly hope and believe is going to happen is the kind of loosening up of the fabric of higher education. And I would say starting at high school. A big part of the mission that we've seen in these towns is not only how do we bring others in, but how do we keep and engage and help flourish the kids who are growing up in these towns. Let's change what it means to be a butcher in South Dakota. It's a really important profession that has a bad tinge to it. And let's educate the culture about that, and let's figure out how to train the kids that this is a technical skill, and let's help them find ways to do this, not just go into their uncle's butcher shop and learn how to do what they're supposed to do. In agriculture, that is a huge thing. So I think the upskilling of youth and giving them the sense of hope and making and shaping the industries that are around there to absorb and change this is I hope one of the biggest changes that we would see.
Okay.
I think that's such an important point. I love that you're highlighting that for Pittsfield especially. You know, I was a political science major, international studies major, and I guarantee some of the trades workers who, you know, may have an associate's degree that didn't pursue full four-year college are making more than some of my fellow poli-sci majors living in a big city. So you can have such a rewarding, rich career and meaningful work and impact on your community. And it doesn't need to, you know, hit all of these educational milestones. I love that you highlight that, because it's a great point for a lot of people in Pittsfield to remind themselves of.
Yeah, and I would say, as a Pittsfield person who has to make 15 phone calls to find an electrician, go to Conic High School and that electrician.
Oh yeah.
We need those people to stay here and to pay them well. Okay, another question, and this is from Sheeran, who's one of our OLLI members and a retired physician who's come to the Berkshires. What do you see as the role of retired people in the revitalization of these communities, and how are communities welcoming retired people? So start with the Fallows, and then the rest of the group can chime in.
Yeah.
No, you go for it. You do it.
I'll say what's been encouraging in the places we've seen is sort of the two-tier generational model of having people who are starting their families decide to either move back to or to move to a place like Pittsfield or places in the Berkshires and begin to create a community there. And then people essentially of their parents' generation deciding that they're going to be involved in the schools, in the downtown, with the parks, and all the rest. My hometown of Redlands, California has very, very much that model of older people and younger people finding satisfaction for both of them in creating a community. So that was one of we didn't spell that out in our sort of markers of civic success along with craft breweries and all the rest, but it certainly is one. If you had people of different generations feeling that a town was not just where they lived, but it was something that they were of, and they were helping to recreate. So we think it's really important.
Yeah, and oddly, I think you've got conflicting things going on in different communities. Like there are some communities where it's the older generation who has built up this wealth of experience and culture and shaping the town, and they're trying to turn it over to the younger people in town, and they have to work really hard to do that. On the other hand, you've got towns where the youth are starting to reshape the town and having to and needing to go out and seek the other generation to come in here. So there, you got to know what's going on in the town too, and reach out to the other side.
Okay, it is 3 o'clock. We have more questions, but I will just end by saying that I met Carrie Holland on the 3rd floor of the Boys and Girls Club in Pittsfield, speed skating. And it's a wonderful group of people from 82 to 12 who get together on Sunday nights. I don't think we're going to be able to do it this year. But speed skating together. And it wasn't until we were at the BIC that, and I didn't have my bicycle helmet on, that Carrie said, "Oh, I know you." So there are many wonderful places where people of different generations can connect. So Ben, thank you. Ben, Sosne, Laura, Carrie, and to the Fallows, thank you so much for a great final session, and encourage everybody to complete those, the monkey, Survey Monkey that will come in your email today so that we can take this to the next step. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank
This has
you.
been
Thank
so
you.
informative for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll
Thank
see you
you
in person
soon.
someday.
Look forward to it. Thank you.